Hello and welcome to McBinge Act 2. We are diving into Act 2, Scene 1 and talking about some of the annotations that you should be making as you read this play. As ever, you need to have a copy of Macbeth in front of you, physical copy that you can annotate, that you can make notes on, that you can highlight. You should have read this scene beforehand so you have a sense of what is going on as I talk about it, because I'm not going to be going through line by line every single bit in the scene. And you should be ready to pause this and make annotations as you go on. And always feel free when I talk about things to do more research afterwards, okay? And to look into extra things that are going on. We're going to start by talking about Scene 1 called Macbeth's Castle. Okay, we've just had the end of Act 1, and Act 1 has been all about the introduction of this prophecy, the conflict between Macbeth's ambition, but also his conscience and his loyalty to the king, and whether or not he should act on this, and what he is to do about it, and how Lady Macbeth comes into that conflict and pushes him into the side of ambition, almost shames him into being more ambitious. And at the end of the act, he has decided he is going to kill the king, and so we're left with kind of that climactic decision as we lead into Act 2. Act 2 stays in the same place. We're still in the court of Macbeth's castle, but instead of getting Macbeth back, we get Banquo, and we get Fleance. Fleance is bearing a torch before him. Fleance is Banquo's son. Now, just before we dive into this play, I want to talk about some really interesting historical context that might kind of colour your understanding of some of the things that are going on. We talked a little bit before about this being written during King James's reign, and it being written as King James was Shakespeare's patron, and discussions of kind of legitimacy and things like that being important to him. Now, if you remember all the way back to the witches' prophecies in Act 1, they say to Banquo, you shall have kings, you shall get kings, though you be none, right? So they're saying to him that in the future, his children, his line, will be kings. Now, Fleance, of course, is his son. Now, this is a reference to what was believed to be a real historical figure. So the histories go at around that time, and around the 16th, 17th century, what people believed was that Fleance, who is a famous kind of figure in Scottish historical law, and the son of Lord Banquo, had to flee Scotland, went to Wales, married a Welsh princess, and then their child returned to Scotland and founded the House of Stuart. Now, the House of Stuart was then a line of kings and queens that led directly down to James VI, who later became James I of England. And then his line continued with English kings. So the House of Stuart was a line of royal kings that began with Fleance. So here we have directly a character, Banquo and Fleance, who are King James's ancestors in the play. And so this is not just a play about legitimacy and ambition and all of those sorts of things, but it's also a play that's somewhat exploring the origins of the House of Stuart. Now, the House of Stuart's legitimacy through Fleance is even more important, because they claimed at the time that Fleance, historically speaking, fleeing to Wales and marrying this Welsh princess, they used this as a connection to make the House of Stuart connected with the legendary King Arthur, who would have had connections with kind of Wales and that kind of Celtic area of the world, and of the United Kingdom, right? And so by establishing Fleance as the ancestor of King James, and by retelling this story, we're kind of even more establishing King James's legitimacy as a descendant not just of Scottish kings, but as a descendant of the legendary King Arthur himself, right? Now, modern historians have since come to decide that both Banquo and Fleance are not real people. They were fictional historical characters. This happens a lot in history, and they probably didn't ever actually exist. But in the time when Shakespeare was writing this play, people would have believed that they did. Shakespeare did not invent these characters. These characters would have been very much part of the historical lore of the time. So our audience would have been aware that Fleance was to be that boy who would run away and marry the Welsh princess and start this line of kings. Okay, and so the witch's prophecy is a nod to that. Anyway, there's some historical context. Feel free to look more into that and research more about it if you want to find out more. It's quite interesting. Okay, so Banquo enters with his son Fleance, and it's important to note that it says bearing a torch before him. The castle is dark. It's the middle of the night. Now, this very much continues this theme and this thread that runs through the play of everything being dark. We talked about the beginning, how one of the primary colours in this play is black, and we can see that continually in the stage directions. Things happen at night. Things happen when they're dark. It continues this kind of horror gothic theme that runs through the play. And that's highlighted by the discussion between Banquo and Fleance. How goes the night, boy? The moon is down. The moon isn't even out. There's no light, just the torch that Banquo is holding. I have not heard the clock. So we've got people kind of wandering around the castle late at night. No moon, just a torch flickering the way. It is later than midnight. They think. They don't really know what the time is. Why are they wandering about? Then Banquo says, again, highlights ideas of darkness. Their candles are all out. And then he says, a heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers, restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. So he can't sleep. Things are weighing heavy on him. Probably his thought about the witches, his thoughts about the prophecies, all of these sorts of things, just like they're weighing heavily on Macbeth, but in a different way. And he's not able to sleep. Now, the inability to sleep is a really recurring motif that runs through this play, and we'll see it quite a few times. But this is the first introduction of it, that when people are plagued with cursed thoughts, that they do not get peace, that they cannot sleep. Sleep is representative of peace in this sense, of finding peace, of finding harmony, of having nice repose, and it's a natural thing to do, right? It talks about nature gives way to in repose. But Banquo cannot sleep because he is not at peace. And sleep will be used repeatedly in this play to show when characters are not at peace. That there is some chaos going in within them. There is a war going on inside of them, and they will no longer be able to sleep. So it's important to pick that out. And then we have Macbeth enters and a servant with a torch, and then Banquo immediately, give me my sword, who's there? Now it's interesting that Banquo should be so edgy, because he is in Macbeth's castle. They are in a castle, traditionally one of the safest places to be, and yet, despite the fact that they've won the war, that everything seems to be peace, that last night everyone was up and having a jolly and drinking and partying and everything like that, here's Banquo wandering the corridors, edgy as anything. He sees someone and he immediately pulls out his sword as if he's on a battlefield and he says, who's there? Now this just highlights how much that witch's prophecy has laid heavily on Banquo and how unsettled everything feels. Having this follow up the fact that King Duncan is arriving and having a feast and everything like that, having this underneath just really highlights how the celebration and the peace that they're having is very superficial. Underneath, there's this continual tone of things being unsettled, things being on edge, things not quite being right. And that's really highlighted by Banquo's reactions in this scene. Who's there? A friend. And then Banquo asks him, "What, sir, not yet at rest?" So again, he's asking Macbeth, "Why are you not asleep?" The king is asleep, so the king is at peace. The king is chilled. He's fine. He's happy. "He hath been in unusual pleasure, and sent forth great largesse to your offices. The diamond he greets your wife withal, by the name of most kind hostess, and shut up in measureless content." So the king's had a great time. He's happy. He's showering Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in gifts. He's given a diamond to Lady Macbeth, which again just highlights how little he's able to see of what their plans are. We've just seen Lady Macbeth push Macbeth into deciding to kill Duncan, and yet here we find out that Duncan's giving her diamonds, giving her gifts because she's such a wonderful host. And so that dichotomy, that contrast between how Lady Macbeth appears and how people perceive her versus what she really is really stands out. So they, but here's Macbeth and Banquo alone in the dark. Well, not alone. Fleance is there, and Macbeth has someone else with a torch, but they're not really that important in this moment. And Banquo then says, "I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you they have showed some truth." So this is what's weighing heavily on Banquo's night. And Macbeth replies, "I think not of them." Now this is obviously untrue, because we've just spent the most of Act 1 with Macbeth racking his brains about this prophecy and working out what the hell he's going to do. But now that he's decided that he's going to kill King Duncan, he doesn't want Banquo to think about it anymore. He wants Banquo to forget all about it. And so he says, I won't think about it. And then again he says, "When we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business." So this is the same as he was saying before. Hello. Yeah, you can come up and sit with me.
Daddy.
Yeah. Oh.
Daddy.
We've got a little mini Macbeth joining us for this. Briefly. So once again, Macbeth is saying to Banquo, "We're going to talk about this at a later time." He seems to want to keep putting it off. This is the same as he did in Act 1, and yet this seems to be the later time. This would be the perfect time to talk about it, but still Macbeth is putting it off. Then there's a little... you want to go down, Oscar?
No.
Okay, off you go.
No.
Sorry. That's what happens when you have a toddler that jumps into your conversations.
I know.
So we're going to continue talking about... we're going to continue talking about this scene. We get to this bit here, where Banquo agrees and says, "At your kind's leisure, sure, I'll talk about it." And then we get this really, really interesting line from Macbeth, which is very, very layered with subtext, should we say. He says, "If you shall cleave to my consent, when 'tis, it shall make honour for you." So he's not giving any specifics here, but he's saying, when it's time, when 'tis time, if you will work with me, cleave to my consent, if you'll consent to do what I want, then it will be honourable for you. Things will go well for you. Now, this is echoing back to that scene in Act 1, Scene 3, right? When they're talking to Duncan, and when... Act 1, Scene 4, rather, when they're talking to Duncan, and when Duncan is saying, I'll help you grow, and blah, blah, blah. And she's using that imagery of, like, if you do as I say, things will go really well for you, because this is the idea of things going really well for you as a king. Now Macbeth is taking on a bit of this language. He's almost seeing himself as king, and he says, if you do what I say when it's time, things will go well for you. But he's not talking about any specifics. Okay? Now Banquo replies, so I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchise and allegiance clear, I shall be counselled. Now this is a very political reply. As long as he doesn't lose any honour in seeking to augment his honour, as long as his allegiances are still clear, then he'll do what Macbeth says. But he very specifically says, as long as you don't ask me to do anything really bad, as long as you don't ask me to betray anyone. Now, why is Banquo having to say this to Macbeth? He's clearly suspicious, and this line acts as a kind of warning to Macbeth. Like, don't lose your honour in trying to augment your honour. Now, this conversation seems really friendly on the surface. Hey, we'll talk later, and if you work with me, that'll be great. It's like, yeah, as long as you don't make me do anything stupid, I will. But it's layered with subtext. It's layered with warnings, accusations, threats beneath it all. And then it ends with a very much, good repose the while. Thanks, sir. The like to you. And then Banquo and Fleance exit. And I think there's so much in just these 6 lines here. There's an implied threat from Macbeth. There's an implied offer from Macbeth. There's a warning from Banquo. There's almost an accusation from Banquo. There's a laying down battle lines between them. And it's all under this kind of friendly discussion between the two of them. And then they exit. And this little kind of, especially with the exclamation marks, this like, go sleep well, good repose the while, when we both know that neither of them can sleep. Right? Macbeth can't sleep. He's too racked with what he has to do. Banquo can't sleep. All these thoughts are laying heavily on them. It's almost comedic how ridiculous it is, right? Especially after what's just come before it. And again highlights that theme that runs through this whole play of putting on this, like, everything's okay facade, while deep down our deep and internal thoughts are dark and black. And that's the big theme that really runs through this play. And then we get one of the most famous little soliloquies in Macbeth. So, go bid thy mistress when my drink is ready, she strike upon the bell, get thee to bed, the servant exits, blah blah blah. And then we get this soliloquy where he sees the supernatural dagger. Is this a dagger I see before me? The handle towards my hand. Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. So he's envisioning, he's seeing, and people have interpreted this in different ways over the years, but he's seeing this dagger appear in front of him that he can't touch, but the handle is facing towards his hand, kind of guiding him towards what's going on. And he says, art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in a form as palpable as this which now I draw. Thou marshalst me the way that I was going. So it's leading him towards the king. Now, you can imagine that perhaps he is so tired, perhaps he's stayed up so late that he can't think properly and he's starting to imagine things, or perhaps this is a creation of the witches. Perhaps it's another form of manipulation to guide him towards his act, to move him towards that act of fate. So there's a little bit of child in the background there for you. What this gives us is, again, highlighting the difference between what appears to be and what isn't. Okay, so there's a vision of this dagger, but it's not actually there. And this just builds upon this kind of appearance versus reality idea that we have from just before. And then the other thing that Shakespeare uses the soliloquy to do is build upon that dark, supernatural, gothic atmosphere. Okay, look at some of this language. I see thee still, and on thy blade in dudgeon gouts of blood. 'Tis this bloody business which was informed thus to mine eyes. Now over the one half-world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel. The wolf whose howls his watch thus with a stealthy pace. There's this wonderful dark horror setting being built up by Macbeth, and it very much leads us into what we know is coming, which is the murder of Duncan. It's all about building up tension at this point. And he's waiting. He's waiting for what he said before, the mistress to strike upon the bell, to know that the plan is ready to go ahead. And he's imagining these dark and horrific things, and he's seeing a dagger dripping with blood in front of him. And it's a first kind of hint of Macbeth going perhaps a little bit crazy with all of this that's going on. But it's a lovely little... Just look at the repetition of words like blood, of darkness, of witchcraft, and think about how on a stage that would really build that atmosphere up. Then the bell rings, and he's off. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. And he's off to kill Duncan. And that's straight in scene 1.